Okay, so last segment, I promise, I hope. That's my intent. So, right, so then then we need to understand what is the context of modern post-Freudian therapeutic psychology, transpersonal psychology, and psychosomatic medicine. What is the context of the phenomenon that involve the healing effects of various kinds of psychological contexts and conditions? And I mean, to be fair, really, we need to go to medical observations that are often called spontaneous remissions, that are, for instance, it often happens with hospital records. There are a number available on the internet that are quite interesting. But also books like Louis Melmadrona and Chauncey Crandall, MDs, in which Christian testimonies of healing, Christian and other testimonies of healing, of spiritual healing and religious healing, are corroborated by medical observations of the actual before and after conditions of a given patient giving the testimony. Marlene Clapese is a wonderful example in terms of cerebral palsy, being healed of cerebral palsy. And there's another remarkable one of Karen Cunningham, whose child was healed of autism. Another one of Lou Gehrig's disease, Wendy something, being among them. And Chauncey Crandall himself has a great one involving actually a resurrection, what amounts to and is in fact a resurrection by a medical doctor. In a sequence of events involving an audio experience of a voice, go back and pray for the guy, a guy who had just died in the ER, and a sequence of events there very interesting that begin to go beyond, that transcend a mere psychosomatic experience and really become then transpersonal, involve various transpersonal elements. So, all that then combines into a modern context that is part of a historical context and a psychosocial and cultural context with psychosocial and cultural components, right? I'm a social sciences guy and a humanities guy, and those kind of knowledge domain terms and phenomenon are bread and butter for me, and but it's clearly that requires both that's an intelligence and a perception that requires attention and can't simply be assumed, and that is part of what atheists and anti-theists, ideological atheists in particular, deny and ignore and show ultimately illiteracy around. They are not capable of assessing such phenomenon accurately. They distort and use popularized forms of understanding, right? So, and how do we, but to keep the argument still a little bit more simple, so all those phenomena that we're talking about are part of the, we've got, let's see, well, the first thing is the university-based system, right? We're using this philosophical format in which we can identify logically consistent ideas, coherent ideas, and fallacies, and we can evaluate the separation of knowledge domains and phenomena domains using an epistemological phenomenon framework that Fritjof Capra is nicely developing as general systems theory, but it is in fact part of epistemology, the philosophy of knowledge, right? Epistemology. And so, modern philosophy, that's all modern philosophy. And we see that going back to the simple pair of natural philosophy, still by Darwin's time, as philosopher of science Massimo Pigliucci has pointed out. Moral philosophy, which I was just looking at, trying to get a firmer reference, but in looking and reading about John Locke, for example, and it's clear that moral philosophy then was the major alternative branch of philosophy that then developed into the social sciences, either alongside or together with the humanities, right? Actually, Adam Smith, right? He was a moral philosopher. He became famous for his economics, but he had been writing about kindness or something just before his Wealth of Nations, a moral philosopher. Right, so then we've got the university-based system that has developed in the history of science and the history of science and religion and the history of the universities and education since before Galileo, right? We're not just talking about science beginning at Galileo. And historian James Hannon has been talking about the medieval origins of science itself, and that takes us even further into that. So that the university, then we see the origins are in monastic schools. The University of Paris was founded, for example, particularly importantly, in about 1150, and Thomas Aquinas then, a short while later, showed up in the 1200s and identified actually about 4 major areas of knowledge, including the natural law area, the human law area about society and so on, and that became moral philosophy, and the scriptural and divine law areas that are part of theology and I guess philosophy of religion at least. So we have that then at the University of Paris in 1150 or so, with the University of Bologna a little bit before it, showing benefiting evidence at least from the primary importance of monastic practice, spiritual practice, that was linked to knowledge development, book study. And that goes back to Cassiodorus, a guy named Cassiodorus, in the 500s, with Saint Benedict of Nursia, a monk at that time. And then we see that French Benedictine monk Raymond went to Toledo in 1080, actually, before Paris was founded, University of Paris, to get a look at all the library that was, the massive library that had been left there by, what's the guy's name? I'm sorry, I'm blanking on his name, but a major Muslim leader. That then is part of the Muslim Golden Age. The reason that it collapsed is because they didn't have a network of universities. Their assumptions, their driving integrity was not the same as the Christian driving integrity that were Jesus' commandments, for example. And so they didn't have the same monastic system for the first place, and the society wasn't structured the same as the Christian society, and was a lot more volatile, and it just simply collapsed. And so the Christians defeated the Muslims, got the library, and Benedictine, this monk then from the monastic system, demonstrates in a powerful way, as a powerful example, how a monk validated and valued study so much that he arrived there and started a school of translation. So, right, so that's then the university-based system that has become, that led the, and drove and created the context that facilitated the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and then finally democracy, another fundamental aspect as part of the Enlightenment, in which the two sort of names that I threw out were Thomas Paine, a Quaker son, as a deist, that links to the Quakers, who were fundamentally important in the anti-slavery, the abolition movement in both the United States and the UK, demonstrating actually sort of the operation of educational material outside the university environment very powerfully, and Thomas Jefferson too. I don't recall that he went to any university actually himself, but valuing being raised in schools and valuing education, you know, he went far, clearly, and he was a theist and reduced Jesus to a moral teacher, but and ultimately in his theist, it was theism then that was maintaining the context, the living context and relational context of Jefferson himself to the various levels of explanation, the various levels of his experience and society, with Jesus as moral teacher. And right, he created the freedom of religion. He's a driving force behind the creation of the freedom of religion to end denominational conflict in particular, and to try to create a format that allowed the expression of desirable ethics and moral philosophies and moral teachings, particularly then that would be Jesus. But it's helpful to contrast then the sense of absolute separation of church and state to the ideas of John Locke and Hugo Grotius earlier, in which particularly John Locke admired the teachings and role model capacity, role model function of Jesus. And I believe Grotius also had a book that entered more deeply into that kind of argument. Right, and so then we see there very operationally and functionally the way that theism is the foundation, is the substrate, is the psychosocial substrate and cultural substrate of the emergence of modern democracy, but not Greece. Greece is, you know, Greek philosophy, and this also goes for science. And so to jump back, actually, this is another point, that science owes its nature to the crucial Christian step, which was, as James Hannam nicely points out, in 1277, the condemnation of 1277 was a declaration by a bishop, the Bishop of Paris. So an authority figure, not usually considered one of the good guys, his authoritative step of condemning Greek assumptions, the use of Greek assumptions, like Aristotle's idea of metabasis, I think it's called, in which things are held to have being pushed in their own kind of motivations in terms of their physical motions, and among other assumptions, that the Greeks held. So there were complaints apparently by academics, at least, scholars, the Christian scholars of the time. And so then his authoritative declaration that was supposed to have been done in relationship to the Pope, but apparently wasn't really, then made that at least that basic key and crucial assertion that some historians have analyzed in detail, that the omniscient God of Christianity then was not subject to ideas like things that clearly don't move on their own, like rocks, that they're falling and so on, can't be attributed to terms like motivations and so on, and that we are in fact dealing with an omniscient God, creator, and the creation of this omniscient God, and that we need to study carefully and identify the lawful regularities in this creation, right? So, few points there, and that's one of my exciting kind of insights in terms of responding to this extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Is a fallacious is an extraordinarily philosophically illiterate statement. It shows a philosophical fallacy of trying to project scientific expectations into the religious sphere specifically, outside the scientific sphere, without examining and studying adequately the material, the religious material itself that we can identify with comparative religious studies and all of the social science and humanities disciplines that have been influenced and supplemented by empirical philosophy, right? Thanks to science's certainly impressive and admirable accomplishments, but within limits, within their box. And outside that box, the bigger box is epistemology and the Christian society that Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine well represent, and John Locke and Hugo Grotius and so on. So, thanks for watching. Let's get up a little closing music, shall we? And I hope to talk to you. Hope to see you another time here on Spiritual Judo for a Sustainable Jesus. I'm Mark Collenberg Montero, your host. Thanks. Take care. Be good. God bless you. In Jesus' name, and the Buddha, and Gandhi, and Mary Baker Eddy, and so on. Vandana Shiva, and so on. Take care. Bye. See you next time.